Hello, my name is Peter Raymer, and today we're going to talk about how to manage D365 batch jobs. So in a previous lesson, we looked at how to create batch jobs using X++ code, and in another lesson, we looked at how to create batch jobs from the front end, both for one-off tasks and reoccurring tasks, and how we can do that for a lot of different processes in the system. Well, what happens once you have existing processes, existing batch jobs that are set up that you want to manage and make sure that they're running successfully, make sure that they don't have an error, or if they do, you want to investigate those exception cases where they have an error. So let's take a look at that. Here, the best place to find all of that is actually under the batch jobs form. So if you type in batch jobs in the search bar, you'll see that this is under System Administration Inquiries Batch Jobs, and that'll take you to the batch jobs form. This is going to show you all of the batch jobs that are in the system, both the one-time batch jobs as well as the batch jobs that are set up with a recurrence. And so the first step usually that we're looking at is a whole bunch of batch jobs. We're wondering how do we find the batch job that I'm actually interested in monitoring? So let's take a look there. So last time we actually ran the invoice batch job for sales orders, and so if I actually just search for invoice batch, I'm going to find that same job under accounts receivable, invoices, batch invoicing, invoice. And so I could have clicked on a sales order, gone to the invoice tab and generate invoice, or I can come here and this already brings up the same form. This one's more complicated than most batch jobs because there's a lot here, but I can actually just click the batch button to bring up a typical batch dialog. I know it's kind of a typical batch dialog because I'm going to see these same buttons, and we'll talk about these in just a minute, where I can set up a recurrence or an alert. And then I've got the batch processing flag here where I can offload this process to the batch server. But the thing that I want to point you to right now is this task description. This says order invoice. I can use this to find this batch job. So as long as the user left this default task or description in here when they click OK, it's going to be the same thing when you come to the batch job form. Also important to note, you can actually change this task description. So if there's a whole lot of task descriptions already in the batch job grid and you're having trouble finding it, even still, you could say add your initials to the front of it if you're in like a test environment or something like that. This can help make that description a little unique and help you find it. So for now, I'm going to go to this order invoice and then go back to our batch job form, and I'm going to filter this on the job description, and I can actually see this batch job that I ran in the last lesson. And so that kind of leads me to the next step, is understanding the batch job descriptions. These batch job statuses. It's really important to understand what they mean. So let's go through each one. The first batch job status that you might see is a waiting status. The waiting status means that this batch job is set up as a reoccurrence, and it is ready for the batch job service to pick it up whenever it's next scheduled to run. That could be pretty much immediately if you just kicked off that batch job, or if it's on a recurrence set to run, say, once a day at a particular time, this scheduled start date and time will show you the next time it's going to run. So waiting really just means it's ready, it will be run on the next time. The next status is executing. Executing means it's actively running the code associated with this batch process. It's actively doing what it's supposed to. After a period of time, that batch job may change to a status of either ended, or it could go back to waiting. So if it's a batch job with a recurrence, it's going to go back to a status of waiting and basically just change between waiting and executing, and then waiting and then executing. If it's a batch job that is really just a one-time batch job, or a batch job with a recurrence, but it's going to have an end date or an end after it runs so many times, it'll eventually end up with a status of ended. If you see a whole lot of batch jobs in this grid with ended, that's okay, that's expected. Ironically, there's another batch job that can clean up the data in here just so it's not so long, but ended is a fine status here. Okay, the next status that we can have shown in here is a status of error. If we see a status of error, that means something has gone wrong, something's happened where the job failed to complete as expected. And then I can show you later how you can view the logs and figure out what's going on with that record. Another status is canceling. Canceling shows when a user has manually come in and changed the status to canceling. You may do that if the batch job's running for a really long period of time. Maybe it's not finishing and you feel like you need to cancel it rather than waiting for it to finish to either completion of ended and move back to waiting or an error status. The last status is a status of withhold. Withhold really means we're pausing the batch job. It's not going to be picked up by the batch job server, but we still want it listed here. We're not ready for it to be totally canceled or done. We're putting it on withhold. We haven't deleted it, but we're kind of pausing it at the moment. So one of the key steps in managing these batch jobs is knowing how to change the status. And changing the status is actually really easy. You come up to the top here and click this change status button, and you're going to get a few options kind of based on what the status is now. I really break these down into roughly 4 scenarios where you might want to change the status. One status is if you want to change this status of a record that's in waiting. So let's find one of those. This record right here is in a waiting status. That means it will be run again on a particular date. I can click change status and I can actually pause this recurring batch job from running again by changing it to a status of withhold and then clicking OK. Yeah, perhaps I need to, I don't want this to run anymore. I know that there's some errors. I want to fix something first. I want to move it to withhold first. Then once it's in withhold, I can really move it back to a waiting status later. Okay, another status or another change that I might want to make is maybe I've got a batch job that is in an error status. If it's in an error or an ended status, maybe I've resolved the issue. I believe I've fixed what's wrong with it. I want to try to run it again. I can change that status to a waiting status. That puts it back in the queue and lets the system handle it again. So those are really step options 2 and 3. Either the status is in error and we're moving it to waiting, or it's an ended and we're moving it to waiting again. And then the last one is if the job is currently executing, we could change the status to canceling, which we need to do first. It won't allow us to move it to withhold or waiting until this job is finished. So we need to move the status to canceling. That will cause the system to cancel the job, often rolling back whatever changes it's made so far. So if you've got a job that's been executing for a long time, if you move it to canceling, it may take a long time to actually finish canceling. So just keep that in mind and do that with caution. Okay, so those are the key steps for understanding the status of a batch job. Let's talk about recurrence. So oftentimes, as we looked here, you're going to create a new batch job, and then you're going to have this button right here called Recurrence. When you click the Recurrence button, you have options for setting up how often do you want this batch job to run and when. And so here I could come in here and say I don't want it to ever end, and I want it to run every day, let's say at 11 p.m. I could do that by changing the recurrence pattern to days, say run every 1 day, and then it's going to run at 11 p.m. You could do that to run every few hours or every few minutes or a few weeks. There's a lot of options in here, and as you change each recurrence radio button here, it changes your options over here and lets you change how this works. So definitely take a look at each one of these and set it to how you need it to. This initial start date and start time is just the first start date and time, but anything that you set up, like reoccurring once every day or repeat after a certain number of days, is going to be based on this first date and time that you set it to. So this recurrence can be set up when you first set up the job, but oftentimes we need to manage and change this recurrence later. Perhaps this time isn't working anymore. We have another batch job that we want to run at that same time. We can actually come back in the system and change this recurrence without setting up a brand new batch job. The way we do that is in the same batch jobs form. We select a batch job that has a recurrence. I'm just picking on this one again, and I click the recurrence button. It's going to show me the exact same form, but it's going to have whatever parameters the last user who set this up specified. So I can come in here, change this, and say, okay, I actually want to run this every 9 hours instead of every 8. And then I can click OK on this, and this new recurrence pattern will get saved. I'll go ahead and hit cancel right now. So that's how we manage the recurrence. It's important to understand that, yeah, we definitely have reoccurring batch jobs in here. They're going to sit in waiting, and we also have batch jobs that have run once, and they're going to have a status of ended or error. All the ones that have ended or error, we could just ignore, or if we want to retry them, we can select them, change the status back to waiting. They'll run one time again. So it's just kind of helpful to understand the difference. The other key difference to understand is that for any of these jobs that have a reoccurrence, like this one here, you won't actually see each instance that this batch job runs in this grid like you would if you had a one-time batch job. Instead, we actually need to view each run of the batch job in the batch job history form. So if you select a batch job, then click the batch job history button, this will open up a grid, and it will show you a record for every time this batch job's run. So if you've got it set to run every 8 hours, you're going to see a record every 8 hours, as long as the batch job wasn't paused or set to withhold during that time. Strangely, this always shows you the oldest run of the batch job first. I tend to, first come in here and click the header under actual start date and time, and then select sort newest to oldest. That changes it, so now I'm going to see the most recent record first, and that's really helpful in understanding, okay, do I have an error now, or was it just an error that happened a long time ago? I do see in this case that I have an error now on this most recent instance. So let's talk about how can we manage these errors. What can we do? And this is almost a much larger topic, so I'm just going to give you the basics to start with. What we can do is we can select this record and then click this log button up at the top. When we do that, we actually get an info log that pops up right here with the larger messages that occurred while this batch job was running, and likely includes the error message. This isn't the easiest to see and doesn't have the full message, so I need to click the message details link to actually see more of the logs. Once I do, I get a dialog here, and this is going to give me the details of what errors or other messages were thrown during this run of the batch job. I can then take this information and try to figure out what steps, what actions do I need to take to actually resolve this issue. Oftentimes the issues are related to some data setup. I need to set up some, I don't know, customer group or item group before a sales order can post, or open a fiscal period, something like that. I need to resolve the issue, and then I can come back and let the batch job run once more, come back to the batch job history form and filter this records or refresh this grid and see if the most recent instance of this batch job has completed successfully, or if it's not, I can re-look at the log and see if there's maybe a new error message. Maybe I solved one issue but not all of the issues. If the error message is really related to code or something technical, you probably want to consult a developer to understand if perhaps there's a bug in the code. Okay, so this is how I look at the error messages, and then you can actually view tasks on these batch jobs as well. I'm going to leave this for a later lesson, but oftentimes there might be multiple tasks involved with a particular batch job. You can come in here and click the log to see the errors on, one specific task out of the whole batch job. In this case, this batch job only has one task. All right, so here's the last thing that I wanted to talk about is what if I don't want to come in here each day and look for these error messages? What if I just want to be informed if there's an error message in my critical processes, and then that tells me I need to come in here? Maybe most days I don't have any errors, and so I don't want to be checking this every single day. We can do that using alerts. So alerts can let us know and inform us if a batch job has ended, or ended with an error, or has been canceled. And so to set those alerts, I can do that either at the time that I create the batch job. So on the same batch job dialog form, I can click the alerts button and get some parameters that I'll talk about in a second. Or maybe I want to manage those alerts and change how they work. I can come in here later and also click the alerts button, and I'm going to get the same dialog box, and I can set up alerts for this particular batch job. I can set if I want to be informed when it's ended, or perhaps just if it erred and canceled. Additionally, I can specify how I want to be informed. I can click the Show Pop-ups radio button. This will then show me the any alerts in the notifications up in the top right of my user, or I can specify that I want to send an email to a particular person. This is kind of nice because I could send an email to someone who's not even a D365 user, but it kind of depends up to you how you want to set this up. It's important, though, if you are going to send an email, that you make sure that the email parameters are set up in D365. So definitely go to System Administration, Setup, Email parameters, or search for email parameters in the top search bar, and make sure that you configured each one of these forms and that the SMTP settings are configured. Otherwise, your emails won't be sent out. But once you've got your alerts set up, then you should be able to see the alerts in this top notification messages here in D365 and be informed whenever there's a problem with the batch job. All right, so we've covered a lot in this lesson. You've learned how to find a particular batch job. You've learned what the different statuses mean and how to manage them, how to change the status. We've also talked about how to view the different batch job history and each run of a particular batch job, and view the error messages, as well as set up alerts for any batch jobs. This is really just the start. There's a whole lot more to learn about batch jobs. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, click the like button. I also invite you to push the subscribe button as well. If there's other topics you would like to see a video on, please post in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you.